last spring when the weather was even warmer than this. At the Strawberry Festival, I was asked by the planning committee what items I might think of to include in the silent auction. And I had heard before of some colleagues who did this, and I was up to give it a try, so I auctioned off a sermon. The high bidder got to pick any topic or text for me to preach on. And this year's high bidder chose the topic of grief. And that's the sermon that you're about to hear today. So that's a pitch to let you know that I will put the same offer forward this year at the Strawberry Festival. I know there had been some people who'd been talking about the idea of pooling their money and trying to come up with something to stump me, but that's not really the spirit of it. 3 years ago, on Ash Wednesday, I happened to be in Ecuador. I was there for the first day of a mission trip to an orphanage in Quito with my previous church. And it hadn't necessarily been our plan to be there on Ash Wednesday. It just happened that way. Incidentally, the day before Ash Wednesday, and really the week before Ash Wednesday in Ecuador, is called Carnival. And from what I can tell, it is primarily celebrated by hitting every person walking underneath your window with a water balloon. So that was our welcome to the country on the last day of Carnival. And then the next morning, Ash Wednesday. So I was the pastor accompanying this group on the trip, and they asked me if I would plan a brief service. I sketched it out in my notebook on the plane while saying a prayer that TSA or customs wouldn't confiscate the little plastic Ziploc sandwich bag of ashes that I had tucked in my suitcase. They didn't. So that second day after we arrived, in the corner of the common room of the orphanage, the 10 of us sat in a circle. We read scripture, we prayed, and then my 10 church members formed a line to receive the mark of ashes on their foreheads. And as soon as they stood up, almost instinctively, the entire staff of the orphanage joined the line, bringing with them children as young as 3. Suddenly, what we had been doing in that corner became the center of attention. And I have to admit that for a second I had this thought that it was very odd that people had lined up so eagerly to hear what amounted to a death sentence. From dust you were made, and to dust you will return. But I carried out my duty. One woman stepped forward, and I scratched a cross of ashes on her forehead, and I whispered to her that ancient reminder, from dust you are made, and to dust you will return. That ancient reminder that someday she would die. And she began to weep bitterly. She didn't move for what felt like several minutes. And then she looked up at me and she said, "Thank you." I went to check in with her later that evening to see what it had all been about. And she let me know that I was the second person to give her that news this week. The first had been her doctor. The cancer was back, and this time there was very little that could be done. And in fact, she died not too long after we returned. My most clear memory of her came in that moment after I placed that simple smudge on her forehead, and she said, "Thank you." I used to wonder a lot why, if it just seemed like the polite thing to do or a way to fill a silence. But I think I know now that it was deeper than that. I think I know why she thanked me. I'm sure that she had appreciated the chorus of cheerleaders telling her to stay positive. I am certain that she smiled genuinely at everyone who praised her courage and told her to stay strong. But in that simple moment, in the privacy of that moment, I think she was grateful that somebody was able to look her in the eye and tell her the truth that she knew deep down she was going to die. No great wisdom on my part. I was just reading from the script, the greatest gift of our Christian tradition. I chose this reading, the 23rd Psalm, for a sermon about grief for two reasons. First, because of what it promises. And second, because of what it does not. This text is looked to often as a source of comfort because it articulates so plainly the promises of God's love. It gives us the image of God as a simple shepherd, leading us beside restful waters and nourishing pastures. This psalm offers us the assurance that we have a home with God that lasts forever, where a table will be generously set and oil lusciously poured. I've taken comfort from this text more than once. I suspect many of you have as well. I have the corner of this page folded down in my pocket Bible because I read it so often at bedsides in hospitals. In fact, we read this psalm in this room yesterday at a funeral. We read it to remind us that even in the face of death, God's love endures. And then, right in the middle of the green pastures and the still waters, there's that dark valley. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. You might remember the more embellished King James version, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil." That's what it says. Here's what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, "If you are with me, God, I will never walk through dark valleys." It doesn't say, "When I walk through the darkest valley, you will lift me up, up, and away, away from all the pain." It doesn't say, God, with you every valley is bathed in sunlight. It says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, because you are with me. It tucks a hard truth in the middle of all those comforting words, because it implies, it says, that you will walk through dark valleys, where the bright light of God's love seems far off and everything is shadowed by death. That's grief. And I know that many of you know it well. I've met a couple people in my life who I would lump into the category of happy-go-lucky Christians. I'm not one of them. These are folks whose faith, at least outwardly, is so unflappable that they seem unable to be sad about anything at all. Always looking on the bright side, always just grateful for the time that we had with him, always sure that she's in a better place. And I know they mean it, and I know they mean well. And frankly, I believe all those things too. But I've always found that assurances like those ring hollow in the face of loss and pain. I know they don't mean to, but when I hear things like that, I feel like someone's telling me, just get over it. I prefer the simple assurance that is found in the middle of this psalm. You will walk through the shadow of death. You don't need to be afraid. God is with you. You will walk through the shadow of death. You don't need to be afraid. God is with you. Our religion is not an escape from the hardest things in life. And our faith is that God is with us in the midst of those moments of pain. We're not in denial. So to those of you who are grieving now, and to the rest of us who have and will, the most important thing to know is this. Our faith in its most genuine form does not deny the pain of grief. It does not deny the sorrow of loss. You can trust God with all your heart and still have your heart broken by loss. Our faith does not ask you to pretend that death doesn't bother you. Our faith does not depend on you putting on a strong face. You can believe in God, you can have faith and still feel deep the sorrow of death. And you can spend a long time grieving. Grief takes time. There was the minister who was here to do part of the funeral yesterday said a line that I loved. He said, "We don't rush into good relationships, and so we can't rush out of them." Taking a long time to grieve does not mean that you lack faith. It means that you're being honest while trusting God. It means that you're looking around and knowing that you are in a dark valley and seeking the ways that God is with you. Grief knocks us off our feet. It knocks our life off course. and it's unavoidable. I do wish dearly that I had better news for you than that. But I do have what I think is the best news that we could hear, and that is that God is with you. So you do not need to be afraid. God is with you. You do not need to be afraid. God is just as at home in the dark valleys as the green pastures and the still water. No matter where you go, God is with you. You do not need to be afraid. Ash Wednesday is coming up. 2 weeks away. I'll be here. 8 a.m., 7 p.m. I'll offer ashes to anyone who comes by. But sometime in the middle of the day, I'm going to take a break. And I'm going to take a little drive. I'm going to go find a church somewhere just far enough away that nobody there will know me from every other person in the line. And I'm going to walk up to that minister, and she's going to scratch a cross of ashes on my forehead. I don't seek out that mark to be morbid. I seek it out because I don't want to build my faith by ignoring death. I don't want to be fearless because I'm in denial. I want to be fearless because I know that God's love is with me no matter what. After she puts those ashes on my forehead, she's going to tell me that I'm made out of the dust of the earth. She's going to tell me that someday I will die. And now that I think about it, I'll probably say, thank you. Because it's nice to hear somebody tell it like it is.